Please don't leave me here. An injured woman begged a Hell's Angel. One biker's choice. Changed. The sky had gone the color of an old bruise by the time Wade Mercer leaned his bike into the first hard curve of Route 9. Rain came down in thin, cold needles, the kind that soaked through leather before a man even noticed he was wet. He checked his mirror out of habit, though there was nobody behind him. Nobody in front of him either. Just mountain road, gray light, and the steady growl of his engine. He was late. Not by much yet, but the meeting started at 5, and Cal would already be standing at the head of the table, tapping his knuckles against the old wood like he did when he was nervous. Tonight, the club would vote on whether to sell the clubhouse. Wade had promised Cal he'd be there to break the tie if it came to that. A man's word was supposed to mean something. Wade had built his whole life on that idea. He twisted the throttle a little more, chasing the minutes he didn't have. That was when he saw them. Fresh skid marks, black and ragged, cutting across the wet asphalt like something had fought hard against sliding. A reflector post lay snapped at the base, orange plastic scattered like broken teeth. And past the guardrail, where the mountain dropped away into pine trees and shadow, a thin gray thread of smoke curled up into the rain. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Wade's stomach dropped before his mind caught up to what he was seeing. He was off the bike before he'd even decided to stop, boots hitting gravel, walking fast toward the edge. Down below, maybe 40 feet through mud and broken branches, a sedan sat wrapped around a pine tree, its front end folded like paper. Steam or smoke, he couldn't tell which, rose from beneath the crumpled hood. "Hey," he shouted, already moving down the slope. "Anybody down there?" A weak voice answered him, thin and scared. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" Wade half slid, half climbed down the muddy embankment, grabbing at wet roots to keep from falling. Mud swallowed his boots to the ankle. Branches tore at his jacket. He didn't slow down. He found her pinned half out of the driver's seat, the door bent inward, her leg twisted at a wrong angle beneath the dashboard. Blood ran from a cut above her eyebrow, dark red against pale skin gone the color of chalk. She was young, maybe under 30, and her eyes were glassy with shock. Hey, I got you," Wade said, crouching beside the wreck. "My name's Wade. I'm not going anywhere. What's your name?" "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Bennett. My phone, it's broken. I can't reach anybody." "That's all right. I'm here now." He looked her over quick, the way you learn to after enough years on the road. Her ankle looked bad, maybe broken. The cut on her head was bleeding steady but not gushing. She was talking, which was good. Talking meant she was still with him. "I need to grab my kid off the bike," Wade said, starting to rise. "Got bandages? A blanket? I'll be right back down." Nora's hand shot out and grabbed the front of his vest, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so hurt. Her fingers twisted into the leather like she was afraid the ground itself might take him. "Please," she said, voice cracking, eyes wide and wet. "Please don't leave me here." Wade went still. He looked at her fingers clutching his vest, then at her face, terror written plain across it, and something in his chest cracked open. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. "I promise you that. I'm not going anywhere without you." He shrugged out of his vest right there and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it close against the cold. Then he got his arms under her, careful of the ankle, and lifted her against his chest. She cried out once, sharp and pained, then clenched her jaw and held on. The climb up was worse than the climb down. Mud gave way under his boots twice, and both times he twisted his body to take the fall on his own shoulder instead of letting her get jarred. Rain ran into his eyes. His arms burned. He kept climbing. They reached the road just as a low whoomp sounded behind them. Wade turned his head enough to see flame licking up from the sedan's crushed engine, orange against the gray afternoon, smoke turning black and thick. He didn't stop moving until they were both clear of the guardrail, Nora shaking against his chest, the meeting back at the clubhouse already starting without him. Wade eased Nora down against the rear wheel of his motorcycle, propping her up so she wouldn't have to hold her own weight. The rain kept coming, soft now, more mist than needles. She was shaking, whether from cold or shock he couldn't tell, so he pulled his vest tighter around her shoulders and knelt in front of her. "Stay with me now," he said. "I'm calling for help." He dug his phone from his jacket pocket, wiped the screen against his shirt, and looked at the top corner. One bar flickered, then dropped to nothing. He walked a few steps down the road, holding the phone up like that might trick the mountain into giving him a signal. Still nothing. "Come on," he muttered, turning in a slow circle. He tried again. The call failed before it even rang once. Behind him, Nora's voice cut through the rain, thin but urgent. "My bag. Did you see my bag?" Wade turned back. "What bag?" "Brown leather. It was on the passenger seat." Her eyes were wide, more scared now than they'd been about her own leg. "It has to still be there. Please, can you look?" "Nora, that car's on fire. I'm not going back down there." "Please." She tried to push herself up and winced hard, sucking air through her teeth. "It matters more than you know." "Nothing matters more than you not bleeding out on this road," Wade said, gentle but firm. Still, he walked to the guardrail and looked over the edge, scanning what he could see of the slope and the shoulder above the wreck. Nothing but mud, broken branches, and orange flame chewing through the sedan's frame. No sign of a bag anywhere near the top of the embankment. "It's not up here," he called back. "Might have gone into the car when you rolled. I'm sorry." Nora made a small, broken sound and pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. Wade didn't have time to ask more. He needed a way off this mountain that didn't involve waiting on a signal that wasn't coming. He walked back to Nora, crouched by her side, and told her he was going to flag someone down. She nodded without looking at him, still holding her face. It took almost 10 minutes, but eventually he heard the low rumble of an engine coming around the bend. An old blue pickup truck, rust creeping along the wheel wells, rolled into view. Wade stepped into the road and raised both arms over his head. The truck slowed, then stopped. An elderly man leaned out the window, squinting through the rain. Beside him sat a woman about the same age, her hands twisted together in her lap. "We got a bad wreck," Wade said, walking up to the door. "Young woman's hurt bad. Ankle's broken, cut on her head. No cell service out here. I need to get her to a clinic." The old man looked past Wade toward Nora, then nodded once. No hesitation. "There's a clinic in Millbrook. 20 miles, maybe. Get her in the back, we'll lay the seat down." "Bless you," Wade said, and meant it. Between the two of them, they got Nora settled across the bench seat, her leg propped up on a folded blanket the woman produced from behind the seat. Wade climbed into the truck bed to ride behind, his bike left leaning against the guardrail, hazard lights blinking weakly in the gray afternoon. The drive felt endless, the truck grinding up one switchback after another. Wade kept his eyes on the back window, watching Nora's face through the glass. Pale and drawn, her lips moving now and then like she was talking herself through the pain. They pulled up outside a squat brick building with a faded red cross painted above the door. A nurse came out at the sound of the truck, took one look at Nora, and called for a wheelchair. They got her inside fast after that. A doctor examined her within minutes, hands moving briskly over her head, her ankle, her arms. Wade stood back near the doorway, dripping onto the linoleum, watching them work. "Concussion," the doctor said after a while, more to the nurse than anyone else. "Fractured ankle, needs a boot, and probably a cast later. Multiple lacerations, and she's showing signs of mild exposure. She's lucky somebody got her out of that cold." Wade didn't say anything. He just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and waited. The clinic had one small waiting room with plastic chairs and a coffee machine that groaned every time it finished a cup. Wade spent the night in one of those chairs, his jacket folded across his lap, waking every hour or so when a nurse passed through the hallway. By morning, the rain had stopped. Pale light came through the blinds in thin strips. Wade stood, stretched his back until it popped, and fed $2 into the coffee machine. He got 2 cups and carried them down the hall to Nora's room. She was already awake, sitting up against the pillow with her ankle wrapped and elevated, a white bandage taped across her forehead. She looked tired in the way that sleep doesn't fix, but her eyes were alert, sharp. Wade handed her one of the cups and pulled a chair close to the bed. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. They sat for a moment without talking, both watching the steam curl off the coffee. Then Nora said, "I need to tell you what was in that bag." Wade set his cup on the small table beside him and gave her his full attention. She took a breath. "I worked at Mountain Haven Care Center. It's a private nursing home about 12 miles from where I crashed. I was there for 2 years. She paused. "I started keeping records about 8 months ago. Notes at first, just things I noticed. Medications being skipped or given late. Call lights going unanswered for over an hour. Residents with bed sores that weren't being cleaned or reported." Wade didn't interrupt. "Then it got worse." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Spoiled food being served because the kitchen was understaffed and nobody was checking. Schedules that showed 3 aides on a floor when there was really only 1. A man named Harold, a veteran, fell in the hallway, and they waited nearly 4 hours to call an ambulance because the administrator said it would look bad to have a second incident that month." Her voice stayed steady, but her knuckles went white around the cup. "I reported it internally, twice, nothing changed. So I started building a real case. Photographs, copies of medication logs, staff schedules pulled against actual sign-in sheets. 4 residents signed written statements for me." She looked at Wade directly. "I was on my way to meet a state investigator when that car came up behind me." Wade was quiet for a moment. "And the bag had all of it. Everything." The word landed flat and heavy. "I had copies, but they were at my apartment, and I don't know if Voss's people have been there." The door opened, and the doctor stepped in, checked Nora's chart, and told her she was staying another night. Her concussion needed monitoring, and her ankle wasn't stable enough for crutches yet. Nora started to argue. The doctor didn't budge. After he left, Nora turned to Wade. "Those residents don't know what happened to me. They don't know if the evidence is gone. Some of them are scared as it is. And if Voss figures out the state investigator meeting fell through, he might move fast." She looked at him carefully, like she was trying to decide how much to ask. "I know you don't owe me anything else, but would you go there? Just look around. Make sure they're okay." Wade picked up his coffee and finished it. He set the empty cup down. "I'll go," he said. Mountain Haven sat at the end of a freshly paved road, surrounded by trimmed hedges and a sign with a mountain peak and a sunrise painted on it. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and had framed watercolors on every wall. The woman at the front desk smiled the practiced smile of someone trained to make first impressions. But past the lobby, the warmth disappeared. Wade walked the main corridor slowly, like a man looking for a familiar face. The carpet was worn thin. 3 call lights blinked steadily above doorways with no one moving toward them. One aide, a young woman who looked like she hadn't sat down in hours, hurried between rooms without making eye contact with anyone. A door stood open near the end of the hall. Inside, the window had a gap in the seal. The old man sitting beside it had a blanket pulled up to his chin and was still shivering. Wade kept walking. He found Ruth Delgado in the common room, sitting straight-backed in a wheelchair with a cup of cold coffee on the table in front of her and a paperback novel face down in her lap. She had close-cropped silver hair, steady eyes, and the kind of posture that came from decades of being told to hold yourself like you meant it. She looked Wade up and down without blinking. "You lost?" "Visiting a friend," Wade said. "You don't look like you have any friends in a place like this." "I'm looking to make some." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without being invited. "Wade Mercer." Ruth studied him a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod. "Ruth Delgado, 30 years Army Medical Corps." She said it the way people say a last name, like it was still part of her. "Then you know how to spot when something's wrong," Wade said. Ruth glanced toward the hallway. Something crossed her face, quick and careful, and then it was gone. She didn't answer. A soft voice came from the chair beside the window. "You said your name is Mercer?" Wade turned. He hadn't noticed the woman sitting there, small and still in the way that people become when the world has started moving too fast for them to bother keeping up. She had white hair pinned neatly, thin hands resting in her lap, and eyes that were watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That's right," Wade said. "First name?" "Wade." The woman went very quiet. She looked at him the way someone looks at a photograph they hadn't expected to find. "Your mother?" she said carefully. "What was her name?" Wade felt something shift in his chest. "Evelyn." The woman opened her mouth to speak again. "Mrs. Cole." The voice came sharp from the doorway. Denise Ralston, the facility administrator, stood with her clipboard tucked under one arm and her eyes fixed on Wade like he was something she needed to remove. "I think it's time our guest found his way back to the lobby." Wade stood slowly. He looked once more at the woman in the chair, Miriam Cole, whose eyes were still holding that careful, unreadable expression. Then he followed Ralston down the hall. Outside, the trimmed hedges and the painted sign looked even more polished in the morning sun. A black SUV was parked near the entrance. A man in a gray blazer leaned against the hood, with his arms crossed, watching Wade come through the door like he'd been waiting for exactly this. Graham Voss was smooth the way expensive things are smooth. Pressed collar, calm eyes, a smile that didn't reach anything behind it. "Mr. Mercer?" he said pleasantly. "I heard we had a visitor." Wade stopped a few feet away and said nothing. "I want to be straightforward with you," Voss said. "The young woman who sent you here was terminated for stealing confidential records. She's facing a civil complaint, possibly more." He tilted his head slightly. "I'd hate to see her pull good people into her situation, people who might not be able to afford the legal attention." His voice stayed pleasant. "The Iron Brotherhood has enough on its plate already, from what I understand." The smile didn't change, but the message was clear. Voss had not just learned Wade's name in the last hour. He had already made phone calls. The sun was low by the time Wade parked his motorcycle outside the clinic. Orange light stretched long shadows across the parking lot, and the air had turned cold enough to see his breath. He walked in through the sliding doors, nodded at the nurse behind the desk who now recognized him well enough not to ask questions, and made his way down the hall to Nora's room. She was sitting up, her ankle still elevated, a tray of untouched hospital food pushed to the side. The moment she saw his face, she set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "Tell me," she said. Wade pulled the chair close and sat down heavily. "It's bad in there. Worse than you probably even know. Call lights blinking with nobody answering. A window with a broken seal. An old man freezing under one thin blanket. Staff running so hard they can't look you in the eye." Nora's jaw tightened. "That's what I tried to tell them. I met a woman named Ruth. Army medic, 30 years. Sharp as anything, but careful. Wouldn't say much." Wade paused. "And there was another one. Miriam Cole. She asked my name. Then she asked about my mother." Nora sat up a little straighter. "Miriam and Ruth are two of the four who gave me signed statements. Miriam used to be a hospice nurse. She doesn't miss anything, and she doesn't scare easy. If she was talking to you, she was testing you." She didn't get far. The administrator, Ralston, cut it off and walked me out. "And then?" Wade's face changed slightly, the way it did when he was choosing words carefully. "Voss was waiting outside. Knew my name already. Knew about the Brotherhood, too. Said something about how the club has enough on its plate. What with money troubles, like it was common knowledge." He shook his head. "Nora, that's not something a stranger picks up in one afternoon. He's got somebody feeding him information fast." Nora's face went pale. "He's already 3 steps ahead of us." "Maybe. Maybe not." Wade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But here's what's bothering me. Your bag. You said it had everything in it. Photos, statements, all of it. But I got you out of that car before it caught fire, and I never saw a bag anywhere near you or the front seat." Nora frowned, trying to remember. "It was on the passenger floorboard. I remember reaching for it right before I lost control." "Then it should have still been in the car when I got to you, unless it went somewhere else." Wade's eyes were steady, thinking it through the way he might study an engine that wasn't turning over right. "I want to go back to where you crashed. Look at the road again. See if there's anything that tells us what really happened before you went off that curve." "You think somebody took it. I think a lot of things don't add up yet, and I'd rather find out from the ground than from Voss's mouth." He stood, glancing towards the window where the last of the daylight was fading into blue. "Get some sleep. I'll head out early tomorrow before the light gets picked apart by traffic." Nora reached for his sleeve before he could step away. "Wade, thank you. Again." He gave her a short nod, the kind that didn't need words attached to it, and left her to rest. The next morning came in gray and cold, mist still clinging low to the mountain road. Wade met June Dawson at the same overlook where he'd first spotted the tire marks 2 days before. June came dressed for work, hair tied back, a battered flashlight and a small tool bag slung over one shoulder. She was Cal's daughter, but she moved like she belonged to the road more than to any clubhouse. "You said tire marks," she said, crouching near the shoulder where the pavement was scarred black. "Right here, and down there." Wade pointed toward the burned wreck still resting against the tree below. June walked the length of the marks slowly, tracing them with her eyes before she ever touched anything. "These aren't a collision," she said finally. "Look at the angle. Whoever was behind her braked hard, then swerved away. If they'd wanted to hit her, they would have kept coming straight. Instead, they pulled off at the last second." Wade crouched beside her. "So they didn't want to kill her. Or they got scared once she lost control." June moved further down the embankment, scanning the brush along the edge of the road. She stopped, reaching into a cluster of weeds, and pulled out a small curved piece of blue plastic. Side mirror housing. And that blue's not a common color. Most fleet vehicles don't paint mirrors that shade unless it's a specialty trim package. She turned the fragment over in her hand, studying a faint stamped number on the underside. This has a part code. If I run it, I can probably find out what dealership carries it, and who bought a replacement. By midday, sitting in the back office of a small parts supplier 2 towns over, June found the invoice. She stared at it a long moment before turning the screen toward Wade. The name on the paperwork was Eli Bennett. Wade said nothing for a long moment. He just stared at the name on the invoice until the letters seemed to burn themselves into his mind. Bennett. Same last name as the woman lying in a clinic bed with a fractured ankle and a bandage on her forehead. Nora's brother? He said finally. June looked up at him. You know him? Never met him, but Nora mentioned a brother once. Younger, struggling with money. Wade folded the invoice and put it in his jacket pocket. Address on there? Bennett Auto Repair, little shop about 20 minutes from here off Route 9. They rode without talking much, the mist finally burning off as the sun climbed higher. Wade's mind moved in slow, careful circles, the way it always did when something didn't sit right. He didn't want to believe it. But the tire marks didn't lie, and neither did a stamped part number. Bennett Auto Repair turned out to be a small cinder block building with a single bay door propped open and a faded sign hanging crooked above it. An old blue SUV sat inside, its front passenger mirror hanging loose by a few wires. A young man crouched beside it, wrench in hand, so focused on his work that he didn't hear the motorcycles pull up until their engines cut off. He turned around, and Wade saw it immediately. The same shape to the eyes as Nora, the same stubborn set of the jaw, though on him it looked more like fear than determination. Can I help you? The young man asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Wade walked into the bay without waiting for an invitation. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the broken piece of blue plastic June had found in the weeds, and set it down on the workbench with a soft click. The young man's face drained of color. Eli Bennett? Wade asked. Eli's eyes darted between Wade's face and the fragment on the bench. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. He set the wrench down like his hand had suddenly forgotten how to hold it. Is she... His voice cracked. Is Nora okay? She's alive, Wade said. Broken ankle, concussion, cuts that'll leave scars. But she's alive. Eli's knees seemed to buckle with relief, and he grabbed the edge of the workbench to steady himself. For a moment, something like joy crossed his face. Then it collapsed just as fast into something darker. Fear. Real deep fear. The kind that comes from knowing you did something you can't take back. Oh, God, he whispered. Oh, God, I didn't mean for her to crash. June stood near the door, arms crossed, watching him carefully. Wade stepped closer, his voice low and even but hard as stone underneath. Then tell me what you meant to happen. Eli sank onto an overturned crate, running both hands through his hair. There's a guy. Works for Voss, the nursing home owner. Calls himself a security consultant. He came to me 2 weeks ago. Said Nora had documents his boss needed back. Said if I got them, he'd pay enough to save this place. Eli gestured weakly at the shop around him. The rusted tools. The leaking roof. We're behind on everything. I've been trying to keep this place open since Dad died, and I couldn't say no. So you followed her? I didn't want to hurt her. I swear I didn't. I just wanted to scare her into pulling over so I could talk to her, maybe convince her to hand the bag over. I pulled up close on that curve, and she panicked. She swerved, and I swerved away. I swear I turned the wheel away from her. I didn't want to hit her car. I just wanted her to stop." His voice broke entirely now, the words tumbling out fast and ragged. "Then she went off the road, and I saw the smoke, and I froze. I ran down there, and the bag was right there on the ground, and I grabbed it and I ran. I left her there. I left my own sister lying there, and I ran." The shop went silent, except for the ticking of a cooling engine somewhere in the corner. Wade looked down at him, at the shame written plain across his face, and let the silence stretch long enough for it to sting. "You made one choice back there that you can't undo," Wade said. "But you're about to make another one right now, and this one's going to decide whether that night on the mountain is the end of your story, or the beginning of you becoming somebody worth forgiving." Nora's clinic room smelled like antiseptic and cheap coffee. She lay propped against 2 thin pillows, her ankle wrapped and elevated on a folded blanket, a bruise spreading purple across her forehead like a shadow that wouldn't lift. When the door opened and she saw her brother's face, something in her chest cracked open with relief. "Eli." Her voice was rough, but her eyes filled with tears. "You came. I've been trying to call you for days. I thought something happened to you. I thought—" She reached toward him with her good hand, and for one moment, brother and sister looked like nothing more than that. Family. Relief. The kind of love that doesn't ask questions first. Then Wade stepped in behind him, and June closed the door quietly, and something in the room shifted. Eli didn't move to take her hand. He stood frozen just inside the doorway, his face pale and wet with sweat despite the cool air of the clinic. Nora's smile faltered. "Eli, what's wrong?" "I have to tell you something." His voice shook so badly the words barely held together. "And you're going to hate me for it. You should hate me for it." Nora's hand slowly lowered back to the blanket. "Eli, you're scaring me. The car on the mountain." He forced himself to look at her, though it clearly cost him everything he had. "The one that ran you off the road. That was me." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was only seconds. Nora's face went through several things at once. Confusion first, like the words hadn't landed right. Then understanding, slow and terrible, spreading through her like cold water. "No," she whispered. "Voss's guy paid me, to get your bag, the documents. I needed the money for the shop, Nora. I was drowning, and he said all I had to do was scare you into pulling over. You were driving that car." Her voice cracked upward, disbelief turning sharp. "You chased me? On that road? In the dark? With rain coming down? That was you?" "I didn't want you to crash. I swear to God I didn't. I turned away. I swerved away from you. I never meant to hit your car. I thought I was going to die." Nora's whole body had gone rigid, her hands gripping the blanket like she needed something to hold on to. "I sat there in the dark with the car smoking, and I didn't know if anyone was coming, and the whole time it was you, my own brother." "I know." Eli's face crumpled. "I know, and there's more. After you crashed, I saw the bag on the ground. I took it. And then I left. I left you there, hurt, and I ran." Nora turned her face away from him, toward the window, and said nothing. The silence was worse than any scream could have been. Wade watched Eli absorb it, watched the shame settle into him like something physical, something that would sit on his shoulders for a long time. "There's something else," Eli said quietly, into the silence Nora refused to fill. "I didn't give him everything. Before I met the consultant, I pulled some of the envelopes out, hid them. I couldn't explain it then, I couldn't hand over all of it." Wade's head lifted. Where? Dad's old station. Route 9, past the church. Nobody's touched that place in 3 years. There's loose boards under the counter where he used to hide the cash box. Within the hour, Wade, June, and Eli stood inside the abandoned service station, dust thick in the slanted afternoon light, spiderwebs draped across rusted shelves. Eli pried up the boards with a screwdriver, hands trembling, and pulled out 3 sealed envelopes wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Inside were photographs of bed sores and empty medication carts, handwritten resident statements, staffing schedules with names crossed out, and shifts left uncovered. June sorted through them carefully on the dusty counter, her face grim. The staffing logs are here, the photos too. She frowned, flipping through the last envelope. But the orders? The ones proving Voss told them to hide it. They're not here. Tucked among the papers was a small note, folded twice, in handwriting none of them recognized yet. The truth is safer with those everyone forgets. The morning came in cold and gray, thin light pressing through the clinic's narrow windows. Nora sat on the edge of the exam table, already dressed, her jaw set with the kind of determination that made the attending nurse stop arguing about discharge paperwork. Her ankle throbbed inside its brace. The bruise across her forehead had deepened overnight, purple bleeding into yellow at its edges. She looked like someone who had been through something terrible and had decided not to let it slow her down. Wade leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, watching her work the crutches into position. June sat in the plastic chair by the window, finishing the last of a gas station coffee she had picked up on the way over. The courier knocked at 8:10. He was young, nervous, and clearly had no idea what he was delivering. He held out a thick envelope and asked for Nora Bennett twice before she reached out and took it. The moment she read the name of Graham Voss's legal firm across the top, her expression went flat. She read it without speaking. Then she handed it to Wade. The letter accused Nora of stealing confidential patient records, violating federal and state privacy laws, and causing serious reputational damage to Mountain Haven Care Center and its ownership. It demanded she surrender every copy of every document she had taken. If she failed to comply within 48 hours, Voss intended to pursue criminal charges and a civil lawsuit for damages. Wade read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and held it. He moved fast, June said quietly. He knew I was discharged today, Nora said. Her voice was steady but thin. He's been watching. Rachel Kim arrived 20 minutes later. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a calm that felt less like ease and more like discipline, like someone who had trained herself not to react until she had thought something through completely. She shook Nora's hand, looked at the letter without touching it, and pulled a fresh legal pad from her bag. Walk me through exactly what you had in the document bag and what was recovered from the service station, Rachel said. No preamble, no comfort first. Nora walked her through it. The photographs, the medication logs, the resident statements, the staffing schedules with the crossed-out names. Rachel wrote everything down and then sat quietly for a moment before she spoke. The problem is how the documents were obtained, Rachel said. You removed those records from your employer's facility without authorization. Voss knows that. His legal team will argue the copies are inadmissible because they were taken unlawfully, and depending on the judge, they may have a point. She tapped the end of her pen against the pad. What we need is independent testimony. People who witnessed the neglect firsthand and can speak to it on the record. We need evidence that was gathered lawfully, or documentation that came from outside the facility entirely. Nora thought of Miriam's note. The truth is safer with those everyone forgets. She didn't know what it meant yet, but it settled somewhere in the back of her mind and stayed there. They were still going over the recovered photographs when Nora's borrowed phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. She answered it. The voice on the other end was low and careful, barely above a whisper. "This is Ruth Delgado. Mountain Haven, room 14. Don't say my name out loud if anyone's near you." Nora went very still. "I hear you." "They posted transfer notices this morning. 6 of us. Me, Miriam Cole, and 4 others who have been making noise." Ruth's voice was tight and controlled, the way someone sounds when they are furious and frightened at the same time. "Distant facilities. 2 of them are over 4 hours away. They're saying it's for medical reasons, but there's nothing wrong with any of us that a little decent care wouldn't fix." A pause. "They're saying 72 hours. Nora looked at Wade. She didn't have to say a word. He was already straightening up from the wall. Ruth's voice dropped even lower. "Once they scatter us, nobody's going to hear a thing." The call ended. The room was quiet for a moment. Wade picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and looked at Nora. "You're not staying here alone," he said. It wasn't a question. He drove her to the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse as the afternoon wore on, the sky turning the color of old copper as the sun began to drop. The building was wide and low, set back from the road behind a gravel lot, its walls covered in years of paint and patches and things that meant something to the people inside. It was not pretty, but it was solid, and it was warm, and nobody was going to walk through that door uninvited. Nora sat at a long wooden table near the window, her crutches propped beside her, Rachel's legal pad open in front of her. Wade set a mug of coffee near her hand without being asked. Outside, the last of the light was fading over the tree line. Wade stood at the window for a long moment, watching it go. "Stopping on that road," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Getting you out of that car. That was the first promise." He turned and looked at her directly. "We're not done. Those people at Mountain Haven, Miriam, Ruth, all of them. If Voss moves them in 72 hours, we lose every witness we have. We lose their voices." He paused. "I'm not letting that happen." Nora met his eyes across the table. "Neither am I," she said. The clubhouse door had barely swung shut behind them when Cal came off his stool. "You missed the vote, Wade." His voice carried across the room, flat and hard. "You know what that means? We're deadlocked. The buyer is getting nervous. And now you want to walk in here with a stolen records mess trailing behind you?" Several members turned from the bar. Big Tom folded his arms. Skeeter set down his beer. The room, warm a moment ago with the smell of wood smoke and old leather, went tight and cold. "I know what I missed," Wade said. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "I was pulling a woman out of a burning car." "And now you're pulling her into our clubhouse," Cal said, "with a lawsuit letter and a nursing home owner threatening criminal charges. You understand what that does to us? Our insurance, our reputation, everything we've been trying to hold together?" Eli shifted near the door, looking like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Nora set her crutches against the table and eased herself down slowly, wincing as her ankle throbbed. "Cal." Wade's tone didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Nobody's asking the club to break a law." "Then what are you asking?" Nora spoke before Wade could answer. "Can I say something?" The room went quiet. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the one she'd written in the clinic while waiting for discharge papers. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "Miriam Cole, 76 years old, served as an Army nurse for 12 years before working in hospice care for another 30. Ruth Delgado, 69, combat medic, 2 tours, Earl Whitfield, 78, Navy, 31 years. Then there's Sam Ostrowski, Pearl Nakamura, and George Fetter. She looked up. These are the 6 people Mountain Haven is planning to scatter across the state in the next 72 hours. Most of them don't have family close enough to fight for them. Some don't have family at all. Nobody spoke. "I'm not asking you to break into anything," Nora said. "I'm not asking anybody here to do anything that could get them arrested. I'm asking for help getting people to a hearing safely. I'm asking for help finding relatives who might not know what's happening. I'm asking if anyone here knows how to reach veterans organizations that might listen faster than a county office will." Her voice cracked slightly, and she pressed on anyway. These are people who served this country. They're not asking to be rescued. They're asking not to be forgotten. Cal looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Wade. 48 hours, Cal said finally. Transportation, phone calls, contacting outside organizations. That's it. No confrontations, no trespassing, nothing that puts a target on this club's back. You hear me? I hear you, Wade said. Good. Cal turned toward the room. Somebody get June in here. And somebody call Denny's wife. Tell her we need food for a crowd. The clubhouse changed shape within the hour. June arrived with a laptop and a whiteboard she dragged from the back office, writing dates and deadlines across it in blue marker, the 72-hour window shrinking with every hour that passed. Rachel sat at the long table with her legal pad, making a list of what evidence still needed to be lawfully gathered, what testimony could hold up, what couldn't. Bikers who an hour earlier had been skeptical were now on their phones, reaching out to veterans associations, old contacts, anyone who might have a truck, a wheelchair ramp, a spare hour to drive someone to a hearing. Skeeter's wife showed up with 2 casserole dishes and a stack of blankets, setting them down without asking why. The way people do when they trust the men they married, even when the reasons aren't fully explained yet. By the time the light outside had gone fully dark, the clubhouse smelled like coffee and casserole and old cigarette smoke, and the whiteboard was full. Nora sat at the table until her eyes started to close on their own, her ankle propped on a folding chair, and Wade noticed before she said a word. "Take my room," he said. "Upstairs, end of the hall, beds made." "Wade, I can't take your—" "You can and you will." He picked up her crutches and set them where she could reach them. "I'll be on the couch." She looked at him, too tired to argue, and nodded. Wade watched her make her way up the stairs slowly, one careful step at a time, and didn't move until he heard the door close above him. Then he stretched out on the couch below, one arm behind his head, listening to the quiet house settle around him. Sunrise came pale and gray over the mountains, and by the time it lit the clubhouse windows, Rachel already had the whiteboard covered in new writing. 4 teams, she said, tapping the marker against the board. She'd slept maybe 3 hours, but her voice was crisp, awake, all business. We need people who don't work for Voss anymore and have no reason to protect him. Former employees, vendors who delivered supplies, relatives who visited enough to notice things, medical professionals who filled prescriptions or made house calls. If we find even 3 or 4 who'll talk on the record, it changes everything. She pointed with the marker as she spoke. June, you and Eli go through the recovered files again. Every name, every date, every dollar amount. I want a list of every vendor and staff member mentioned, cross-checked against what's public. Wade, you and Nora go see the cook. Skeeter, take Big Tom and start knocking on doors for the maintenance staff. I'll work the phones for the pharmacy. Nora was already at the table, her ankle propped on a chair, dark circles under her eyes, but her face set with purpose. She reached for her crutches before Wade could hand them to her. You slept? He asked. Enough. She didn't meet his eyes. It wasn't quite true, and they both knew it, but neither pushed further. The cook's name was Donna Pruitt, and she lived in a small house at the edge of town with a chain-link fence and a dog that barked twice and then gave up. She answered the door in a robe, took one look at Nora's crutches and bruised face, and let them in without asking many questions. "I wondered when somebody would come," Donna said, pouring coffee nobody had asked for. "I quit 6 months ago. Couldn't stomach it anymore." She told them about the deliveries. Full invoices, half the food. Cases of vegetables that showed up in the paperwork but never in the walk-in cooler. Residents getting the same thin soup 3 nights a week, while the books claimed fresh meat and produce. "I complained," Donna said, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping. "Denise told me to mind my kitchen and let management mind the budget. I got tired of watching old folks eat crackers for dinner while somebody padded their pockets." She agreed to put it in writing. Nora's hand shook slightly as she wrote down Donna's number, but her voice stayed even. Back at the clubhouse, June and Eli sat hunched over the laptop, a spreadsheet growing longer between them. Eli's finger traced down a column of numbers. "This vendor," he said, tapping the screen. "Same routing number as 3 other suppliers. It's the Shell Company. Voss is paying himself and calling it food service." June leaned in, checking his math, then nodded slowly. "You're right." She didn't smile, but something in her face eased, like she was starting to trust him a little more than she had that morning. By early afternoon, Rachel called with news of her own. A pharmacy technician named Alvarez remembered filling reduced orders for months, medications that should have arrived weekly showing up every 10 or 12 days instead. He was willing to swear to it. Skeeter and Big Tom returned near 4 o'clock, and Skeeter dropped a phone on the table, scrolling to a folder of photographs. A maintenance worker named Curtis had given them dozens of pictures. Black mold spreading behind a baseboard, a broken heater with exposed wiring wrapped in tape instead of repaired, a call button torn from the wall, its wires just hanging, never fixed. "He said Denise told him to fix it when there's budget," Skeeter said. "That was 8 months ago." Rachel gathered every name onto the whiteboard, drawing lines between them, and for the first time all day, she allowed herself something close to a smile. That evening, the clubhouse filled with the smell of stew and the low murmur of conversation. Nora sat near the window with her ankle propped up, watching Wade across the room. He knelt beside an old wheelchair that belonged to Earl Whitfield, one of the veterans June had brought over that afternoon for safekeeping. The wheel had jammed, the axle bent slightly from years of hard use. Wade turned it slowly in his big, scarred hands, testing the give, saying nothing. "Just needs a little grease and a new bolt," Wade said quietly to Earl. "Give me a minute." Earl watched him work, and Wade didn't rush, didn't sigh, didn't treat the old man like an inconvenience. His hands moved careful and sure, the same hands that had carried Nora up a muddy embankment, now easing a rusted bolt free with the patience of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. Nora watched him a long moment, something in her chest loosening that she hadn't expected. Mountain Haven's front doors were propped open for visiting hours, and Wade walked through them wearing a clean shirt instead of his leather vest. Behind him came June, Skeeter, and Big Tom, all dressed down, all quiet. No patches, no chains, just 5 people carrying a checkerboard, a toolbox, and a bag of paperback westerns. The receptionist looked up, startled, then remembered she couldn't legally turn away visitors during posted hours. She gave them a tight smile and a clipboard to sign. "We're just here to see some folks," Wade told her, keeping his voice easy. Nothing more than that. They spread out through the common room the way June had planned it the night before. Skeeter found an old man alone by the window, a transistor radio in his lap gone silent months ago, and within 20 minutes had the back panel open, a wire resoldered, and the sound of a ball game crackling back to life. The old man's eyes went bright and wet at the same time. Big Tom sat with a woman named Frances, who hadn't had a visitor in 4 months, according to the sign-in sheet. He didn't say much. He just listened while she talked about her husband, gone 11 years now, and nodded like every word mattered. Wade found Ruth in the sunroom, arms crossed, clearly expecting an argument. "Come to check up on me?" she said. "Came to lose at checkers," Wade said, sitting down across from her. She beat him twice before she said anything real. Then, quiet, like she was testing the words before she trusted them out loud, she told him about a Tuesday 3 weeks back, when her blood pressure medicine hadn't come until Thursday. She'd asked twice. The aide told her to be patient. Ruth said she understood patience. What she didn't understand was why an old soldier's heart medication was treated like a request instead of a need. "Would you say that again?" Wade asked gently. "Into a recorder, so it's on the record?" Ruth studied him a long moment, then nodded once, sharp, like a decision made and finished. She spoke clearly into June's phone, dates and details laid out the way she must have once given medical reports in the field. Missed medication, delayed refills. An aide who rolled her eyes when Ruth pressed the call button twice in one night. 2 residents nearby, a soft-spoken man named Harold and a woman named Bettina, had listened to the whole thing without moving. When Ruth finished, Harold cleared his throat. "I'd say something too," he said. "But not if I'm alone in it. Not if they can just wheel me off somewhere after and nobody ever hears from me again." Bettina nodded beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap. Wade leaned forward, elbows on his knees, meeting their eyes one at a time. "You won't be alone in it. I'll be there. Whatever room, whatever hearing, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere until this is finished." It was a plain promise, no dramatics in it, but Harold's shoulders eased like something heavy had shifted off them, and Bettina reached over and squeezed his hand. Across the room, families who had come expecting a quiet Sunday visit were starting to notice things they'd been trained not to see. A daughter frowned at the mold stain behind her father's headboard. A son asked why the call button by his mother's bed had no wire at all. Denise Ralston hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, but couldn't stop people from looking now that they'd started. Wade found Miriam near the library shelves, sorting large print novels with careful, precise hands. "Your note," he said quietly, "about the truth being safer with those everyone forgets. What did you mean?" Miriam didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were steady, patient, the eyes of someone who had outlasted worse men than Wade could imagine. "Not yet," she said. "Some truths, once spoken too early, get buried before anyone can dig them back up. Mine isn't ready. When it is, you'll know, and so will everyone else." She went back to her books, and Wade didn't push. That evening, 3 counties over, Graham Voss sat behind his desk with a phone in each hand, dialing family after family on Mountain Haven's visitor list. His voice was warm, concerned, practiced. "I just want you to know," he told one worried daughter. "There's been some outside interference lately. A woman with a grudge, and unfortunately some rough characters helping her stir things up. We take your father's safety very seriously, and I'd hate for anyone to be frightened by people who don't have his best interests at heart." He hung up, smiled faintly at the ceiling, and dialed the next number. Nora's ankle throbbed in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the ache in her chest. She had tried lying still, tried counting the cracks in the ceiling of the spare room the club had given her, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, She saw Ruth's face when she talked about the missing medication. She saw Harold's careful words. Not if I'm alone in it. She reached for her crutches and made her way down the hallway, careful on the stairs, one hand gripping the rail. The clubhouse was quiet at this hour, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of an old clock somewhere in the dark. A light was on in the main room. Wade sat at the long wooden table, a small lamp pulled close, his leather vest spread out in front of him. He had a needle and thread in his big hands, working slow and careful at a tear along the shoulder seam. The same tear Nora remembered gripping that day on the mountain, her fingers curled into the leather like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Couldn't sleep either," she said. Wade looked up, not startled, like he'd expected her. "Ankle?" "Ankle. Ruth, Harold, all of it." She lowered herself into the chair across from him, setting her crutches against the table. "What are you doing?" "Just fixing it up a little." He held the vest up so she could see the tear more clearly, the frayed edges where her hand had pulled so hard the seam had given way. "Been meaning to." Nora watched his hands move, steady despite their size, the needle small and strange between his thick fingers. "Miriam looked at you funny today," she said. "When you said your mother's name." "Evelyn Mercer." She stopped what she was doing. Wade's hands paused for just a moment before continuing. "She used to be a hospice nurse. Maybe she knew a lot of names." "That's not what her face said." He didn't answer right away. He tied off the thread, bit it clean, and set the vest down on the table between them like it was something fragile. "My mother was sick a long time," he said finally. "Cancer. Took almost 2 years to finish what it started." His eyes stayed on the vest, not on Nora. Toward the end, she needed help with everything. Eating, walking to the bathroom, remembering what day it was. Nora stayed quiet, letting him find his own pace. "I couldn't stand it," Wade said, "watching her get smaller every week, so I'd get on my bike and ride, sometimes for a whole day. Told myself I was clearing my head so I could come back and be strong for her, but that wasn't really it." "What was it?" "I was running," he said, and the word came out rough, like it had been sitting in his throat for years. "Running from watching someone I loved disappear a little bit at a time. It was easier to be on a road somewhere than to sit in that room and feel helpless." "Were you there when she died?" "Yeah, I was there. But there were weeks before that when I wasn't. Days I chose the highway over her doorway." He looked up at Nora now, and his scarred face looked older in the lamplight, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I've spent a long time thinking that means I left her, that when it mattered most, I couldn't stay." Nora leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "Wade, you were there when it mattered most. You said it yourself. You were there at the end. Doesn't erase the days I wasn't." "No," she agreed, "but maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe the guilt you're carrying isn't proof that you failed her. Maybe it's just love that hasn't figured out how to forgive itself yet." Wade was quiet a long moment, his eyes fixed on the torn place in the vest, half-stitched now, half still open. Outside, the sky beyond the window had started to shift from black to a deep, bruised gray. The first hint that morning was coming. "I'm not going to fix that tear all the way," he said finally, running his thumb along the frayed leather. "Going to leave a little of it showing." "Why?" "Because that's the night I finally stopped riding past somebody who needed me to stay." He set the vest down gently, like it mattered more than it used to. "Figure I should be able to look at it and remember that, every time I put it on." Morning came gray and slow, the kind of light that made the clubhouse look tired instead of rested. Nora had finally slept for a few hours, her body giving out even though her mind kept spinning. When she woke, She found the smell of coffee drifting up the stairs and the sound of voices in the main room. Rachel Kim was already there, a leather folder open on the table, her dark hair pulled back tight like she meant business. She looked up when Nora came in on her crutches. "You look better," Rachel said. "Not good. Better." "I'll take it." Nora lowered herself into a chair. Wade set a cup of coffee in front of her without being asked. Rachel slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are the new resident agreements Mountain Haven has been sending out to families this week. I got a copy from a contact at the county office." Nora scanned the first page, and her stomach tightened. The words were wrapped in soft language, words like partnership and quality care commitment. But underneath the friendly headings sat something colder: broad arbitration clauses, confidentiality provisions. Language that made families sign away their right to sue, their right to speak publicly, their right to bring in outside help without written permission from management. "He's getting families to sign this?" Nora asked. "Some already have," Rachel said. "Voss is telling them it's a routine update. Nothing to worry about. He's very convincing in person, from what I hear." Wade leaned over the table, reading upside down. "This is how he keeps winning. Not just hiding things, making sure nobody can talk about it even if they figure it out." "That's exactly it," Rachel said. "And there's something else. I talked to 3 families this morning. 2 of them told me the same story. When their parent complained about being cold or hungry or in pain, Voss or Denise told them not to worry, said their mother was having some confusion, said their father's memory wasn't what it used to be." Nora set the papers down, her jaw tight. "He's not just hiding the neglect. He's making the residents look unreliable before anyone even hears their side. If Ruth complains, she's difficult. If Miriam complains, she's confused. Nobody checks because the families already believe there's nothing to check." "That's been his whole strategy," Rachel said. "Isolate every complaint, discredit every witness. As long as nobody compares notes, he stays safe." Wade set his coffee down harder than he meant to. "Then we make them compare notes." The day filled quickly after that. Rachel spent hours on the phone with families, walking them through their actual rights, explaining that the new agreements could be challenged, that no one could be forced to sign away court access under pressure. Nora and Wade visited 3 houses in town, sitting at kitchen tables with worried sons and daughters who had genuinely believed their parents were slipping mentally. By the end of the afternoon, something had shifted in their faces. Doubt was turning into anger, and anger into willingness. Ruth's sister, a small, stubborn woman named Loretta, took the most convincing. She sat with her arms crossed for almost 20 minutes before Nora showed her Ruth's medical chart and the missed dosage records. Loretta's face crumpled, and then hardened. "She told me Ruth was just getting old and dramatic," Loretta said quietly. "I believed her." "You're not the only one," Nora said. By evening, Loretta had agreed to appear at an emergency hearing. Rachel called just after 6 with the date. 2 days, she said. The county agreed to an emergency session because of the transfer timeline. It's tight, but it's real. Eli arrived not long after, looking exhausted but focused, a laptop tucked under his arm. He'd spent the day tracing payments from Voss's Shell account. "There's a company called Baycrest Consulting," he said, spreading printouts across the table. "Money moves from Mountain Haven to Baycrest, then back out to a name I recognize. Same guy who paid me." Cal walked in just as Eli finished talking, his face heavy in a way that made the room go quiet. "Got a call today," he said. "The buyer looking at the clubhouse is getting cold feet. Doesn't want his name near a scandal." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Might walk before we even close." The next morning, the clubhouse felt different before anyone said a word. Nora noticed it the moment she came down the stairs. Men who usually nodded at her who had started bringing her coffee without being asked, now looked at the floor when she passed. The air felt heavy, like a storm sitting just outside the windows waiting to break. Cal called the meeting for 9 o'clock. By 9:15, every member of the Iron Brotherhood who could ride or walk had crowded into the main room, and the mood was worse than Nora had feared. "The buyer called me at 7 this morning," Cal said, standing at the head of the long table. His voice was flat, tired. "Said he won't move forward unless we make a public statement. Says we need to say we're not affiliated with Nora Bennett or her, quote, allegations against Mountain Haven." A big man named Deke slammed his hand on the table. "So we lose the building because Wade decided to play hero on a mountain road?" "That's not fair," June said from the corner, arms crossed. "Isn't it?" Deke shot back. "We've been trying to save this place for 2 years. 2 years. And it's gone in a week because Wade couldn't ride past a wreck." "I wasn't going to leave her there," Wade said quietly. "Nobody's saying you should have left her to die," another member, Frankie, said. "But you didn't have to become part of her whole crusade. You could have called it in and kept riding." Wade's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "She begged me not to leave. I made her a promise. I wasn't going to be the kind of man who breaks a promise like that." "And now the club pays for it," Deke said. The room erupted into overlapping voices, some defending Wade, most just angry and scared about losing the only home the club had left. Nora sat near the back, her crutches leaned against the wall, feeling smaller with every word. Wade let the noise die down on its own. When it did, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his keys, the ones that opened the clubhouse door, the storage shed, the meeting room safe. He set them on the table without ceremony. "If this is about the club's future," he said, "then I won't make that choice for you. I'll step down as road captain. Whatever happens next is yours to decide." The room went silent. Nora felt her stomach drop. She grabbed her crutches and pushed herself up. "No," she said. "This isn't right. I'll go. I never should have brought this here in the first place." Her voice cracked. "I'm not going to be the reason you lose everything you built." "Sit down, Nora," Wade said, gentle but firm. "I mean it, Wade. Look at them. Look at what I've done to this place." Wade shook his head slowly. "You didn't do this. Voss did this. And those residents didn't ask for trouble either. They just got left behind by people who found it easier to look away." He looked around the room, meeting eyes one at a time. "I stayed on that road because leaving would have been easier. I've spent a long time in my life doing what was easier. I'm done with that." June stood up and walked to the table. Without a word, she set her own keys down beside Wade's. "My father always said the patch on our backs means something," she said. "If it doesn't mean standing by people who need us, I don't want to wear it anymore." One by one, others rose. A younger member named Petey added his keys, mumbling something about his grandfather being in a home, not unlike Mountain Haven. 2 more followed, their keys landing softly against the wood. Cal stood at the head of the table, watching the small pile grow. His face was unreadable for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his own keys, and placed them gently on top of the others. "Brotherhood was never about the building," he said, his voice rough. "It's about who we don't leave behind. I forgot that for a while. I won't forget it again." The room was quiet, but it wasn't the same heavy silence from before. It felt like something had been decided. Just before sunset, Cal's phone rang. He stepped outside to take it, and when he came back in, his expression had shifted again, this time toward something like relief. "Buyer just pulled out," he said. "Officially. Said he doesn't want his name attached to any of this, one way or the other." No one cheered. But no one looked sorry either. The next morning, the clubhouse smelled like coffee and paper. Someone had pushed the long table against the wall, and Nora had taken over most of it, spreading folders across the wood like a quilt made of evidence. Each folder had a name written in careful block letters on the tab. Ruth Delgado, Miriam Cole, Harold Fenn. She sorted them by date first, then by type of neglect, then read through each page one more time to make sure nothing was out of order. Her hands still ached from the crash, and her ankle throbbed if she stood too long, but she did not stop. Rachel Kim sat across from her with a legal pad and a calm, steady voice that never seemed to rise no matter what she asked. She was running practice interviews with anyone willing to sit still long enough. Right now, it was Frankie, the biker who had complained the loudest the day before, now sitting stiffly in a folding chair while Rachel asked him simple questions about what he had seen during visiting hours. "Just tell me what you saw," Rachel said. "Not what you think it means, just what you saw." "I saw an old man's call button sitting on the floor," Frankie said. "Wire cut clean through. Looked chewed almost." "Good," Rachel said, writing it down. "That's exactly how you say it at the hearing. Plain and simple. Let the facts do the work." Nora looked up from her folders and allowed herself a small, tired smile. A week ago, Frankie had wanted nothing to do with any of this. Now he was rehearsing testimony like it mattered to him personally. Maybe it did. Outside, Wade stood beside his motorcycle with his phone pressed to his ear, arranging vans through a veterans outreach group 2 counties over. The organization had 2 accessible vehicles with lifts and trained drivers, and after Wade explained the situation, the woman on the phone did not hesitate. "We don't leave our people stranded," she said. "You tell those residents we'll be there before sunrise." Wade thanked her and hung up, feeling something loosen in his chest for the first time in days. Getting Ruth and Miriam and the others to the hearing safely had weighed on him more than he'd let anyone see. Inside, near the back of the clubhouse, Eli sat alone at a small table with his hands folded in front of him, practicing words he never thought he would have to say out loud. Rachel had told him plainly what to expect. He would have to state, under oath, that he had accepted money to steal his sister's records. He would have to say it without softening it, without blaming anyone else. "I took money," he said quietly to himself, testing the words. "I took money to steal from my own sister." Nora heard him from across the room. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. That was new. A week ago, she couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. By early afternoon, word came from Mountain Haven's administration. Denise Ralston had sent a formal notice claiming that 4 residents, including Ruth Delgado and Miriam Cole, were medically unable to attend the hearing due to fragile health. Rachel read the notice twice, frowning. She pulled up her files and compared the new medical restrictions to older paperwork she had gathered from the facility months before. The wording was almost identical, down to the same phrases, the same doctor's signature that seemed to appear on every questionable form. "These aren't real medical assessments," she said, tapping the papers. "These are boilerplate. Same administrator every time. Denise Ralston signed off on all of them." She picked up the phone and called a nurse who had quietly helped them before, someone still working inside Mountain Haven who believed in doing right, even when it was dangerous. Within the hour, the nurse confirmed what Rachel suspected. Ruth and Miriam were both stable enough to travel, no restrictions needed, and had been for weeks. That evening, the clubhouse filled with people who wouldn't have been caught near each other a month earlier. Bikers stood shoulder to shoulder with residents' grown children. Volunteers carried in trays of food. Veterans advocates sat beside nurses swapping stories. Someone had strung up string lights along the porch, and the whole place glowed warm against the dark. Wade was refilling a coffee pot when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, one he guessed belonged to Miriam, since she had asked a nurse to send it for her. "After the hearing tomorrow, please stay. I have something that belonged to your mother." The sky was still black when Wade rolled out of the clubhouse, breath fogging in the cold air. Frost covered the grass, and the porch lights still burned from the night before, nobody having remembered to turn them off. He didn't mind. It gave the yard a soft glow, like the whole place was holding its breath for what was coming. 2 accessible vans sat in the gravel lot, their lift doors already open. June had her head under the hood of the first one, checking belts and fluid levels by flashlight, even though the veterans group had promised the vehicles were road-ready. She didn't trust promises. She trusted her own 2 hands. "She's good," June said, wiping grease off her fingers. "Both of them. I checked the tires twice." Wade nodded and walked to the second van, running his palm along the side panel like he was greeting an old friend. Today, of all days, nothing could go wrong. Inside the clubhouse, the mood was different than it had been the night before. Quieter, more careful. Volunteers moved between residents like nurses on a ward, though most of them had never worn a uniform in their lives. They helped Harold Fenn button a clean shirt over his undershirt. They pinned Ruth's service ribbons to her blouse with steady hands, careful not to jostle her sore shoulder. Miriam sat very still while a young woman combed her thin white hair and set it with a few bobby pins, the way Miriam said her own mother used to do it. "You look sharp," Wade told Ruth, kneeling in front of her wheelchair so they were eye to eye. "Don't patronize me, Mercer," Ruth said, but her mouth twitched like she wanted to smile. Wade grinned and moved down the line, checking each face, each name. He had made a list the night before, matching one advocate to each resident who planned to speak. Rachel had insisted on it. "No one goes anywhere alone today," she'd said. "Not for a second." "Miriam, you're with Nora," Wade said, checking his clipboard. "Ruth, you're with Nora too in the same van. Harold, you've got Frankie. Dolores, you've got June." Nobody argued. They had gone over it twice already. By the time the sun started to lighten the ridge behind the clubhouse, everyone was loaded and buckled. Nora climbed into the back of the lead van, settling between Ruth's wheelchair and Miriam's seat, her crutches propped against the window. Her ankle still throbbed, but she barely noticed it now. Her hands were full of folders, corners worn soft from handling. "You've read those 100 times," Miriam said, watching her. 101, Nora said. "I want to know them backward." Ruth reached over and patted Nora's knee. "You'll do fine, kid. Just tell the truth. That's all any of us are doing today." Behind them, Eli pulled his old SUV into line, engine idling rough but steady. In the passenger seat sat a plastic bin, evidence copies organized in labeled folders exactly the way Rachel had shown him, sorted by date and topic, duplicates tucked into a second folder in case the first was somehow lost. He had triple-checked it before the sun came up, the way he used to check bolts before letting a customer drive off in a repaired car. He would not let anything slip through his fingers today. Not again. Wade swung onto his motorcycle at the front of the line, glancing back once at the small procession behind him. 2 vans, a handful of cars, and Eli's SUV, all waiting on his signal. He thought of his mother for half a second, of the text still sitting unanswered on his phone, and then he pushed the thought aside. There would be time for that later. Right now there were people counting on him to get them there safe. He raised his hand, then lowered it, and the engines began to move, one after another, out onto the road as the first gray light broke over the mountains. Ruth reached over and took Miriam's hand. Nora watched them both, her folders resting in her lap, her heart pounding with something that felt, for the first time in weeks, less like fear and more like hope. The hearing room emptied slowly, people lingering in small clumps to hug residents and shake hands with strangers who had become allies overnight. Wade stood near the back wall, still not quite believing what had happened. The panel's words echoed in his head. Temporary block on the transfers. Immediate inspection ordered. It felt like the ground had shifted under everyone's feet, and for the first time in weeks, it had shifted the right way. Miriam found him there, her wheelchair pushed by a volunteer, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Wade," she said. "Nora, come with me. There's a room down the hall. I need to speak with you both, and I would rather not do it where everyone can hear." Nora glanced at Wade, curious, but neither of them argued. They followed Miriam's chair down a narrow hallway to a small conference room, empty except for a table and a few folding chairs. The volunteer stepped out and shut the door softly behind her. Miriam looked up at Wade for a long moment before she spoke. "You don't remember me," she said. "Not really, but I remember you." Wade frowned, searching her face. Something about her eyes, pale blue and steady, tugged at a memory buried deep. "I was a hospice nurse," Miriam said, "before I ever came to Mountain Haven as a resident myself. 20-some years ago I cared for a woman named Evelyn Mercer." The name hit Wade like a fist to the chest. He sat down hard in the folding chair across from her, his legs suddenly unsteady. "My mother," he whispered. "Your mother," Miriam agreed. "She talked about you every day, told me about your rides, your bike, the wind in your hair. She worried about you something fierce, but she was never ashamed of you. Never once." Wade's throat tightened. "I wasn't there enough," he said. "Toward the end. I couldn't stand watching her get smaller every day. I'd ride for hours instead of sitting with her." Miriam reached out and took his rough hand in her thin, papery one. "She knew that, Wade. She told me herself. She said her son wasn't running away from her. He was running so he could find the strength to come back." Wade felt his eyes sting. He blinked hard, but it didn't help. Miriam reached into the small bag on the side of her wheelchair and pulled out a yellowed envelope, worn soft at the edges like it had been handled many times over many years. "She wrote you a letter the night before she died. She asked me to give it to you, but you left the hospice before I could find you, and I never had a way to reach you again. Not until I saw your name in a newspaper story about your motorcycle club, years later. And then, of course, you walked into Mountain Haven yourself." She placed the envelope in his hands. Wade stared at it, his mother's careful handwriting spelling his name across the front. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. Nora stood quietly beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, saying nothing. Wade unfolded the letter and began to read. His mother's words swam in front of him, familiar even after all these years, warm and steady like her voice used to be. She thanked him for always coming back, no matter how far he rode or how long he stayed away. She told him she understood his fear and that she had never once doubted his love. And then, near the bottom, she asked him to take that fierce loyalty of his and give it to people who had nobody else. People the world had forgotten. People who needed someone willing to stay. Wade's shoulders began to shake. He pressed the letter to his chest, and the tears he'd held back for over a decade finally broke free. Nora knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Miriam simply reached out and rested her frail hand on his back, steady and warm, the same way she must have once rested it on his mother's. For a long moment, the room held only the sound of Wade's breathing, ragged and raw, and the quiet comfort of two women who understood grief well enough not to rush it. Then Wade's phone buzzed in his pocket, sharp and insistent, breaking the stillness. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and pulled it out. It was Cal. "You need to see the news," Cal said, his voice tight. "Now." The clubhouse was quiet by midnight, most of the members gone home or asleep in the back rooms. Wade sat in the main room with the lights turned low, the television still glowing with the news report that had ruined everything. He hadn't moved in an hour. Beside him on the couch, Nora shifted again, wincing. "Stop that," Wade said, not looking away from the dark screen. "You keep moving your foot like that and you're going to tear something worse than what's already torn." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been off that ankle for 3 days when the doctor told you 6 weeks minimum. I can see it swelling through your sock." Nora looked down and saw he was right. The skin above her ankle brace had gone tight and shiny, an angry purple creeping up past the bandage. She hadn't even noticed, too busy running numbers in her head, replaying every mistake. "Prop it up," Wade said, already dragging a footstool over. He didn't wait for her to argue. He lifted her leg gently and set it on a folded blanket, careful the way he'd been careful with her that first night on the mountain. "This is my fault," Nora said quietly. "All of it. Ruth in the hospital, Miriam on a transfer list, Eli gone God knows where. I pushed too hard, too fast, and now Voss is going to walk away clean because I couldn't just wait for a lawyer to do this the right way." "You didn't do this alone. I was standing right next to you every step." "Doesn't matter. Voss took every good thing we did and twisted it into something ugly. The bikers sitting with residents, that's suddenly intimidation. Ruth's medication mistake, that's suddenly because outsiders disrupted operations. Every kind thing turned into evidence against us." Nora pressed her palms against her eyes. "How do you fight someone who can make compassion look like a crime?" Wade sat down heavily across from her, the old chair creaking under his weight. He rubbed a hand over his face, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked truly tired. Not just worn out from a long day, but tired in the way a man gets when he starts to wonder if the fight was worth it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I keep thinking about Miriam's letter. My mother wrote that I should give my loyalty to people who had nobody else. I thought that meant if I just showed up, stayed put, refused to leave, it would be enough. But Voss doesn't play by those rules. He's got money and lawyers and cameras that lie. I stayed, Nora. I did exactly what she asked. And it still might not be enough." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over to the side table where the yellowed envelope sat, its edges soft from handling. She picked it up carefully and slid the letter free again, though she'd already read it twice tonight. "Listen to this part again," she said, and read aloud. "I understood your fear, and I never once doubted your love." She looked up at him. "Wade, this letter never once said you'd win. It didn't promise you'd fix everything or beat every bad man who ever hurt someone weaker than him. It just asked you to come back, even when leaving would have been easier, even when staying didn't guarantee anything at all." Wade stared at her, and something in his shoulders loosened, just slightly. "So maybe winning isn't the point tonight," Nora went on. "Maybe the point is we don't stop, even when Voss makes it look like everything we do is wrong. We just find another way to stand still." Wade nodded slowly, thinking. "Then we stop giving him room to twist things. No more visits that could be filmed and cut up. If they're going to move residents, we demand it happens in the open, witnessed, medically reviewed. Nothing done quietly where he can control the story. And we need something he can't touch, Nora said. Something outside his building, outside his files. Something he never got his hands on. Miriam said something today about the truth being safer with people everyone forgets. Before either of them could say more, headlights swept across the clubhouse windows, cutting through the dark. An engine idled outside, unfamiliar, rattling like it had seen better decades. Wade stood, moving toward the door out of instinct, one hand already reaching for the light switch. The door opened before he got there. Eli stood on the threshold, one eye swollen nearly shut, his knuckles scraped raw, his shirt torn at the collar. Behind him, a borrowed car sat crooked in the gravel lot, engine still ticking. "I need help," Eli said, his voice cracking. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." Nora sat up so fast her ankle screamed at her, but she barely felt it. "You ran," she said, her voice flat and cold. "Ruth is in a hospital bed. Miriam is on a transfer list, and you disappeared." "I know." Eli's hands were shaking. He didn't come further into the room, like he didn't believe he'd earned the right to. "I know how it looks." "How it looks?" Nora's voice cracked upward. "You left me on the side of a road once already, Eli. I woke up in a ditch because of you. And then the second things got hard. You vanished again. Don't stand there and tell me you know how it looks. You don't know anything." Wade put a hand up, not to silence her, but to slow the room down. "Let him talk," he said quietly. "Then decide." Eli swallowed hard. A bruise was already darkening along his jaw, purple bleeding into yellow at the edges. "Voss's guy, the consultant, he found me after the hearing, cornered me behind the diner. He said if I didn't disappear, they'd make sure police believed I tried to kill Nora on that mountain. Said they had people who'd swear I ran her off the road on purpose. He said attempted murder Nora. He said it like it was already decided." "So you ran," Nora said again, but some of the heat had drained out of it. "I got as far as the bus station in Carver's Mill, had a ticket in my hand. Was going to just disappear, start over somewhere nobody knew my name." Eli's voice broke. "And I sat there on that bench, and all I could think about was you laying beside that car, begging somebody not to leave you, and I thought, I'm doing it again. I'm leaving you again. Only this time there's no excuse. Nobody's chasing me. I'm just choosing to go." He reached into his jacket, hands still trembling, and pulled out his phone. "So I came back instead. I got proof, Nora. Real proof. Not stuff I stole from you. Stuff that's mine." He held the phone out like an offering. Wade stepped over and took it, turning the screen so Nora could see, too. Text messages filled the display, thread after thread between Eli and a number saved only as V Consultant. Instructions about the document bag. A price, a time and place. Then, further down, a voicemail transcript, and beneath it, an audio file. "Play it," Nora said. Eli reached over and pressed it himself, like he needed to hear it as much as they did. A smooth, cold voice filled the room. "You disappear, or we make sure the world believes you tried to kill your own sister. Nobody will ask questions once they see the security footage we can build. Understand me, Eli. This ends quiet, or it ends with your name in every headline." Nora stared at the phone long after the recording ended. Her jaw tightened, but not at Eli this time. "There's payment records, too," Eli said. "Transfers, dates, everything lining up with when I took the bag, and texts telling me to make sure I got every piece of it before you reached the investigator." Wade was already moving toward the hallway. "Rachel needs to see this tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." They called Rachel Kim, and she arrived within the hour, hair still messy from sleep, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. She sat Eli down at the clubhouse's scarred wooden table and set a small recorder between them. "Before we start," she said, looking at him steadily, "I want you to understand. I am not offering you immunity. Whatever you say here can be used against you." "I know," Eli said. "I don't want a deal. I just want it to be true, all of it, out where people can see it." He talked for nearly an hour. He left nothing out. The money. The following. The moment he could have struck Nora's car and chose to swerve away instead. The moment he left her bleeding on the roadside and drove off into the dark. When he finished, the room was silent except for the recorder's small red light. Nora reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him since the crash. "You came back," she said. "That matters. It doesn't erase anything, but it matters." By the time the sky outside the clubhouse windows turned gray with early morning light, Rachel had already sent copies of everything: the messages, the payment records, the voicemail, and Eli's recorded confession to the county prosecutor's office, the state regulatory board, and a secure legal storage server that Voss could never reach. The morning fog had not yet burned off the mountains when Wade parked his motorcycle outside Mountain Haven, gravel crunching under his boots. Rachel climbed out of her car right behind him, a leather folder tucked under one arm, and beside her stood a woman Wade had not met before, gray-haired, calm-eyed, carrying a black medical bag like it weighed nothing at all. "Dr. Patterson," Rachel said, making the introduction quick. "She's independent. No connection to Mountain Haven, no connection to Voss. County approved her this morning after I made some calls." "Good," Wade said. "Let's go." Inside, Denise Ralston met them at the front desk, her smile stretched thin and brittle. "Miriam's transport is scheduled for 9 o'clock. I don't see why there needs to be any delay." "Because," Rachel said, sliding a folded document across the desk, "state law requires an independent medical evaluation before transferring any resident flagged as medically fragile. This is that evaluation. It happens now, or the transfer doesn't happen at all." Denise's mouth tightened, but she said nothing more. She simply turned and led them down the hallway. Miriam's room smelled like lavender soap and old paper. She sat in her chair by the window, already dressed, a small suitcase packed, and waiting by the door like she had given up arguing with what she believed was coming. When she saw Wade behind Rachel and the doctor, something shifted in her face. Not surprise, relief. "Well," she said, "I suppose you didn't come to say goodbye." "No, ma'am," Wade said. "We came to stop it." Dr. Patterson set her bag down gently and pulled a chair close. "Miriam, I'm going to check your heart, your lungs, your blood pressure, and ask you some questions. Nothing painful. Just need to see for myself if traveling today would be safe for you." Miriam nodded and rolled up her sleeve, without being asked twice. She had clearly done this before, back when she was the one holding the stethoscope, instead of wearing the paper gown. While the doctor worked, listening, checking, writing notes on a clipboard, Miriam kept her eyes on Wade. "There's a bag in my closet," she said suddenly. "Cloth 1, blue, with a drawstring top. My sewing bag. Would you bring it here?" Wade crossed the small room and opened the closet door. Among a few housecoats and a winter coat far too heavy for the season, he found it. A faded blue cloth bag with a frayed drawstring, heavier than it looked. He carried it back and set it in Miriam's lap. She loosened the string with steady fingers and reached inside, past a tangle of yarn and knitting needles, until she pulled out a stack of notebooks. Small ones, the kind sold in drugstores for $1, their covers soft and worn from handling. There had to be a dozen of them. "What is all this?" Rachel asked, stepping closer. Insurance, Miriam said simply. She opened the top notebook. Neat handwriting filled the pages, dates in the margins, times noted beside each entry. March 14th. Ruth's morning medication delayed 3 hours. No explanation given. March 15th. Call button in room 12 unanswered for over 90 minutes. April 2nd. Ambulance for Mr. Feldman delayed until family threatened to call themselves. Ruth and I started keeping these almost a year ago, Miriam said. After they cut the night staff down to 2 girls for the whole floor. We weren't the only ones. There's 4 other residents who kept their own. Missed medications, spoiled meals, the alarms that never got fixed, staffing shortages nobody wanted written down anywhere official. Rachel was already turning pages, her expression sharpening with every line. Miriam, these dates go back months. This corroborates everything. The pharmacy shortages, the falsified staffing logs, Eli's confession about the timeline. I know, Miriam said. That's why I mailed copies every week. Wade looked up. Copies? To who? A veterans legal aid group 2 counties over, Miriam said, closing the notebook gently. My late husband was Army. They still send me their newsletter. I started sending them our diaries instead, 1 page at a time, folded up in regular envelopes so nobody here would think twice about the mail. Mr. Voss could burn every paper in this building. She looked at Wade, her eyes steady and clear. But he was never going to find these. The truth is safer with those everyone forgets. That afternoon, the field beside Mountain Haven's parking lot filled up slow, like water rising in a bucket. Motorcycles rolled in one by one, engines rumbling low, then cutting off to silence. No revving, no showing off. Wade had made that clear at the clubhouse that morning. We are not here to scare anybody, he told the members gathered around him, his voice flat and serious. No blocking cars, no stepping on their property unless we're invited. Anybody puts a hand on somebody, anybody raises their voice at Voss or his people, you're done. Not just for today, for good. Cal had stood beside him, arms crossed, nodding along. You heard the man. Now the bikers stood in a long line along the road's edge, each one holding a sign June had helped make the night before. Simple white poster board, black marker, nothing fancy. Each sign had a name and a number. Ruth Delgado, 22 years, U.S. Army medic. Miriam Cole, hospice nurse, 40 years of service. Harold Feldman, Korea, 1952 to 1954. Beside each biker stood a relative, an old woman holding her husband's photograph, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt gripping his mother's sign so tight his knuckles had gone white, a teenage girl who kept wiping her eyes, holding a sign for her grandfather. News vans had already parked along the shoulder, cameras propped on tripods, reporters checking their microphones. Word had spread fast, faster than Wade expected. Rachel said that was the point. A large screen had been wheeled out on wheels from someone's garage, hooked up to a laptop and a folding table. At exactly 2 o'clock, the screen flickered to life, and Ruth's face filled it, pale against a hospital pillow, an IV line taped to the back of her hand. Can everybody hear me? She said, her voice raspy but strong enough to carry. We hear you, Ruth, Wade called back, and the crowd murmured in agreement. Good, she said, because I got things to say and I don't plan on saying them twice. She talked about the medication error that put her in that bed, about being told she was confused when she pointed out the wrong pills in the cup, about watching other residents get the same treatment, and how it took an outsider showing up on a motorcycle before anybody with power decided to actually look. When she finished, Miriam stepped forward, her granddaughter helping her balance on the uneven grass. She held up the stack of notebooks for the cameras, her hands steady even though everyone could see how thin her wrists had become. These are not stolen, she said clearly. These are ours. We wrote them. We mailed them. And they tell the truth this facility tried to hide. She read from one entry, then another, her voice never rising, never breaking, just laying out dates and names like stones on a path. Then Eli stepped up beside her, his face pale but his shoulders square. He didn't look at Nora, who stood near the front with her crutches, because he knew if he did, he might lose his nerve. "My name is Eli Bennett," he said. "I took money to steal my sister's evidence. I ran her off the road, even though I didn't mean to hurt her, and then I left her there. I'm not asking anybody to forgive me today. I just want you to hear this." He held up his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, then pressed play. The voicemail crackled through the small speaker, tinny but unmistakable. A man's voice, cold and businesslike. "You need to disappear for a while, Eli. If anybody asks, you were never involved. Understand me?" A ripple went through the crowd. Somebody gasped. A reporter turned to whisper into her microphone. Wade stepped up last. He didn't say much. He pulled a folded, yellowed piece of paper from his vest pocket, the one Miriam had given him, and read one line out loud, his voice thick. "A person's life is not defined by every moment he left, but by the moments he chose to turn around." He folded the letter back up and looked at the crowd. "That's why we're here." That's when the sound of sirens cut through the afternoon air, not the wailing kind, just a slow, deliberate approach. A dark sedan pulled up behind the news vans, and a woman in a gray suit stepped out, a badge clipped to her belt. "I'm the county prosecutor," she announced, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. "Effective immediately, all transfers from this facility are suspended. My office is seeking emergency warrants." The next morning came gray and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Wade stood across the road from Mountain Haven with Nora beside him, her crutches sunk a little into the soft shoulder of grass. They watched 3 unmarked cars and a van with county markings pull into the parking lot, followed by 2 more vehicles that parked at odd angles, blocking the exits. "Stay back," Rachel had told them the night before. "Every step you take onto that property without permission gives Voss's lawyers something to use against us. Let them work." So they stood at the edge of the lot, close enough to see but far enough to matter, and they waited. Investigators in windbreakers carried boxes out the front doors within the hour. Denise Ralston stood on the steps in her cardigan, arms wrapped around herself, watching them file past with case after case of paperwork. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't say much of anything. Across town, other agents were doing the same thing at Voss's corporate office, a sleek glass building that had always seemed too clean for what it hid. And at a small strip mall office belonging to the shell company his consultant used to move money, more boxes came out. More computers got tagged and bagged. Nora gripped Wade's arm. "It's actually happening. It's happening," he said. By mid-morning, a young nursing aide named Priya walked out of the building on her own, no investigator escorting her, and crossed the lot toward the families waiting there. She had tears on her face, but her voice was steady. "I have text messages," she said, holding up her phone with shaking hands. "From Denise, telling us not to log injuries, telling us to say residents fell if the family asked." She wasn't the only one. A man who worked maintenance came forward next. Then 2 more aides, each carrying pieces of the truth they'd been too afraid to hand over before. Fear, it seemed, worked both ways. Once people saw Voss couldn't touch them, the silence broke like a dam giving way. By afternoon, word came through Rachel that investigators had found what they needed. Bank records showing money meant for food, and medical supplies routed instead into accounts tied to Voss's family. Falsified staffing schedules that listed nurses on shifts they'd never worked. Emails, plain as day, instructing staff to delay ambulance calls until after visiting hours ended, so families wouldn't see the emergencies happening in real time. Instructions to hide bruises with long sleeves before inspections. A whole folder labeled, without any shame at all, inspection prep. Graham Voss was arrested outside his office that afternoon, led out in handcuffs past a crowd of reporters who had been waiting for hours. His consultant was picked up an hour later at a motel 2 counties over, his bags half-packed. That evening, the county held an emergency public meeting in the old courthouse chamber downtown. Every seat filled fast, and people stood along the walls, spilling into the hallway. Wade sat in the front row in his vest, Nora beside him, Eli a few seats down with his hands folded tight in his lap. Miriam was wheeled up to a small table set before the podium, a microphone lowered to meet her. The room went silent when she began to speak. "I want to tell you something," she said, her voice thin but clear. "The bruises healed. The missed medications, mostly, we survived. But the thing that hurt the worst wasn't any of that." She paused, looking out over the crowd. "It was believing that nobody would care because we were old. That once you get to a certain age, people stop seeing you as somebody worth protecting. That's the wound that doesn't heal easy." The room stayed still. Nobody moving, nobody speaking. Then Wade stood. He didn't say anything. He just stood, his hand resting briefly on the back of his chair, looking toward Miriam with the kind of steadiness that needed no words. One by one, the room rose with him. Cal stood. June stood. Ruth's sister stood, tears running freely down her face. Families who had sat through months of fear and doubt rose to their feet. And then the reporters stood too, and then people who had never met a resident of Mountain Haven in their lives stood simply because everyone around them had. The next morning, Rachel called before Wade had even finished his coffee. "They're talking about closing it," she said. "Today. Emergency administration means the county can shut the doors and move everyone out within the week." Wade set his cup down, slow. "Move them where?" "Wherever there's an open bed. Different facilities, different counties, maybe different states." Rachel's voice was tired but steady. "On paper, it looks like protection. Get them away from the danger fast." Nora was already reaching for her crutches when Wade told her. "No," she said, before he'd even finished the sentence. "No, that's not protection. That's just neglect wearing a different coat." She called Rachel back herself, put her on speaker so Wade could hear. "You cannot scatter them," Nora said. "That's exactly what Voss did, just faster and with better paperwork. These people just spent months proving they matter enough to be heard. If we let the county break them apart now, all we did was trade one kind of abandonment for another." There was a pause on the line. "I agree," Rachel said finally, "but I need you to help me build something better before this afternoon's hearing. An alternative, something the county can actually approve." So Nora went to work, sitting at Wade's kitchen table with her ankle propped on a chair, phone in one hand and a legal pad in the other. She called veterans advocacy groups. She called 2 ethical care providers Rachel trusted, both willing to send licensed staff on short notice. She called families, one by one, asking not for money but for patience, for a few more days, for trust that hadn't been earned back yet but was worth extending anyway. By the afternoon hearing, Nora stood before the county panel on her crutches, Rachel beside her with a folder of proposals. "Give us a transition period," Nora said. "Temporary management, outside oversight, and let the residents help decide what happens to their own home. Don't punish them a second time for surviving the first." The panel approved a 2-week emergency transition, residents remaining in place under new supervision while a permanent solution was worked out. The 2 weeks that followed moved fast, but not without wait. Temporary managers arrived within days, hired through the state and vetted by Rachel personally. New aides were brought on, enough to cover every shift without exhaustion. A physician came through the halls with an actual chart in hand, reviewing every resident's medications one by one, correcting doses that had gone unchecked for months. Wade helped haul in new equipment himself, wheelchairs with wheels that didn't stick, a heating unit for the east wing that had been broken since before Nora even worked there. Cal sent 2 club members to help carry boxes, and June rewired a busted call system in a single afternoon, muttering the whole time about how something this simple should never have been allowed to fail for so long. Miriam and Ruth were given seats at the planning table, right alongside the officials. When someone suggested repainting the dining hall a soft beige, Ruth shook her head flat out. "Yellow," she said. "We're not living in a hospital anymore." They painted it yellow. By the end of the first week, a local charitable trust stepped forward with money and a plan, partnering with the veterans groups and several families to buy the property outright. Rachel worked late nights drafting the paperwork, and on the 12th day, the county approved the transfer. Mountain Haven would not close. It would become something else. They named it Haven House Community Residence, its finances open for any family to review, its residents given a real voice in who ran the place and how. Near the end of the second week, Rachel found Nora sitting outside on a bench, watching workers plant new flower beds along the walkway. "They want to offer you something," Rachel said, sitting down beside her. "A resident advocacy coordinator position. Once you've healed. Somebody who makes sure this never happens again, from the inside." Nora's eyes filled before she could stop them. "I'd like that," she said quietly. That evening, Wade found her still out there, watching the last of the daylight settle over the property. "They asked me too," he said, "wondering if I'd organize volunteers. Visitors for the ones who don't get many." Nora smiled up at him. "Well," she said, "looks like neither one of us is going anywhere." The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold coffee. Eli stood in a borrowed shirt that didn't quite fit, his hands folded in front of him so tight his knuckles had gone white. The judge read the charges slow. Theft of records, reckless pursuit causing injury. Eli didn't flinch at any of it. He'd asked Rachel 3 times to make sure he wasn't getting some deal that made things sound softer than they were. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing beside him, "my client came forward voluntarily with evidence that helped expose ongoing criminal neglect and fraud. He has cooperated fully, without seeking immunity, and has accepted responsibility from the start." The judge looked over his glasses at Eli. "Is that right, son? You understand what you're pleading to?" "Yes, sir." Eli's voice cracked a little. "I did it. I scared my sister on that road, and then I left her there. I'm not asking anybody to forget that." The courtroom was quiet a moment. Then the judge nodded. Slow, like he'd heard a lot of speeches in his time, and this one landed different. 2 years probation. Restitution to be paid over time. 300 hours of supervised community service. Eli let out a breath he'd been holding since he woke up that morning. Outside on the courthouse steps, Nora waited for him. She didn't hug him. Not yet. She just looked at him for a long moment, the October wind pulling strands of her hair loose. "You did the right thing in there," she said. "I know it doesn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. Forgiveness isn't something that happens because you said sorry in front of a judge, Eli. It's not a magic word." She shifted her weight on her crutches. "It's going to be built one choice at a time, after all the cameras are gone and nobody's watching you anymore. That's the only kind that means anything." Eli nodded, eyes wet. "I understand." "Good," Nora said. "Then let's see you prove it." The months that followed had a rhythm to them, slow and steady, like something finally settling into place after being shaken too hard for too long. Eli started showing up at Haven House 3 days a week, tool bag over his shoulder, always early. He fixed call buttons that had been broken for years. He repaired wheelchair wheels and patched the transport van's brakes himself, checking every bolt twice. Ruth teased him mercilessly the first month, calling him the felon to his face, until one day she stopped and started calling him by his name instead. Nora watched from a distance at first. Small things. Whether he showed up on time, whether he complained, whether he ever tried to make his community service sound like some big sacrifice. He never did. He just worked, quiet and steady, like a man trying to earn back something he knew he didn't deserve yet. Her own recovery moved slower than she wanted. Physical therapy twice a week, her ankle stubborn about healing all the way. She cursed at the exercises more than once, but she kept going, because giving up wasn't something she let herself do anymore. Not after everything. Wade came by the clubhouse most Sundays with a handful of other bikers, and together they drove out to Haven House for what everyone started calling visiting hours. Though it wasn't official, just something that had become tradition. Wade sat with Miriam and played cards. He listened to war stories from residents nobody else had time for. Slowly, the club's abandoned clubhouse property transformed, too. Workbenches going in where old couches used to sit. A garage bay opened for anyone needing help with a bike or a wheelchair or a beat-up transport van. A sign went up out front. Iron Brotherhood Community Workshop and Veterans Center. Cal stood back one afternoon, arms crossed, watching a line of elderly folks get help climbing into a van the club had fixed up special for rides to doctor's appointments. "Would have never guessed this is what saved the place," he said. "Neither did I," Wade admitted. Between all of it, something quiet grew between Wade and Nora. No rush, no big declarations. Just dinners after long days, phone calls that stretched too late into the night, his hand finding hers without either one making a thing of it. 11 months after the crash, on a cool morning with the leaves just starting to turn, Wade pulled up outside Nora's apartment on his bike, helmet under his arm. "Get dressed warm," he said. "I want to take you somewhere." The mountain road looked different in the morning light. Wade slowed his bike as they came around the curve, and Nora felt her chest tighten even before she saw it. The guardrail was new, silver and solid, running along the edge where the ground used to just fall away into nothing. Beside it stood a small metal post with a call box mounted on top, red letters spelling out emergency in the pale sun. Wade pulled over onto the shoulder and cut the engine. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any noise. Nora climbed off slow, careful on her ankle even though the doctors had cleared her weeks ago. She walked to the guardrail and put her hand on it, feeling the cold metal under her palm. "They put it up 2 months ago," Wade said, coming to stand beside her. "County finally got around to it. Better late than never, I guess." "Better late than never," Nora repeated softly. She looked down the slope where the tree still stood, scarred along one side where the car had hit it. The burn marks had faded some, but she could still see them if she looked close enough. "I think about that day a lot," she said. "Not the crash, the part right before you got there. Lying there in the mud, thinking nobody was coming." Wade didn't say anything. He just waited, the way he always did, giving her room to get to what she needed to say. "When I grabbed your vest and asked you not to leave," Nora went on, "I wasn't only scared of dying out there. I think some part of me already knew I'd lost everything else. My job. Eli in a way I didn't understand yet. Any kind of normal future I thought I was building." She shook her head. "I thought exposing Mountain Haven had cost me everything that mattered, and I was just waiting to find out if it was going to cost me my life, too." "It didn't," Wade said quietly. "Cost you your life?" "No." She looked up at him. "But I didn't know that yet." Lying there, all I had was you telling me you weren't going anywhere. That was the only solid thing left. Wade looked out over the guardrail, down toward the tree, his jaw tight the way it got when he was working through something hard. You want to know what stopping for you gave me? He said. Nora nodded. My mother used to beg me not to leave, he said. Not out loud, not always, but I could see it in her eyes every time I got on my bike and rode off during those last months. She never made me feel guilty for it. That was the worst part. She just let me go every time, like she understood I couldn't sit still and watch her get smaller. He paused, rubbing a thumb along the seam of his glove. I told myself for years I failed her, that I wasn't the son she needed at the end. He looked at Nora. But stopping for you on this road, that gave me a chance to be the man she always said I already was. Miriam told me once that Mom knew I always came back, that she wasn't scared I'd leave for good. She was scared I'd stop believing I was worth coming back to. Nora reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You came back, she said. Every single time it mattered. So did you, Wade said. You came back to yourself, after everything Voss tried to take. They stood there a while longer, the wind moving through the trees below, the guardrail catching the light. Neither of them said anything else. There wasn't much left that needed saying, not standing in the exact spot where everything had started. Finally, Wade squeezed her hand. Come on. Let's get you home before your therapist gives me an earful about you standing on that ankle too long. Nora laughed, the sound easy and warm, despite everything the road still carried in its memory. She let him lead her back to the bike, and as they rode away, the guardrail and the call box stayed behind them, steady and waiting, in case anyone else ever needed somewhere to hold on until help arrived. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.